Mhm. My mouth is full. Hi, Ben. So this is Jennifer up here. I don't know, you can't tell. But Rick Rogers in the blue sweater. And to my right is Wendy. Oh, she's waving. And Isabel Jackson is on our left. And we have one member of the audience.
Don't
So
forget
it's a very
Carrie.
small group. I don't think it's any reflection on your wonderful job with the ordinance.
Well, I appreciate that. It's always a good place to start with. So how can I be of assistance this afternoon?
Well, oh, now we have Tom Tudor, who helped, draft the town centers ordinance back in the day. So Ben McCall, the attorney.
I was the last person to amend the land use ordinance.
Amend the land use ordinance, okay. So, yeah, we'd love you to go through your, suggested changes to the ordinance and, whatever your suggested rationale for making these changes.
Sure. Well, there aren't very many, and I tried to keep them as on point as possible. The first is just a change to the definition. And it is the addition, we had spoken at the last meeting of the desire to clarify that a tiny home could very well qualify as either a principal or as an ADU. And so we've just added an additional portion to the definition sub C, making that clarification, just so everybody's on the same page. The next one down is just to add the 190 square foot minimum that is now in place under LD 2003. So it's really just adding a floor as well as a ceiling. We've kept the same 800 square foot maximum that you have in your ordinance already. The rest of them are, frankly, they are suggestion. Well, not the rest. I'll go through them one by one rather than making blanket statements. I've deleted G just based on our conversation before. That is the issue of owner occupancy and primary residence of an ADU is not addressed in LD 2003. So this is a policy choice on that, that the town can make one way or the other. I did hear some trepidation, at least among the group last time, about keeping that in place. But if you choose to keep that sort of restriction that requires an ADU to be, to be on an owner-occupied lot rather than rented out along with the primary residence, then you could certainly keep that restriction in place. That was just trying to reflect what we had talked about before. The next two are really just to change the numbering, the lettering. We had talked about, and again, I was trying to capture really the spirit of our conversation last time. There had been talk about adding a requirement that these not be short-term rentals, regardless of the occupancy of the principal unit. And so new I has been amended to add that restriction. You'll notice that instead of just reinventing the wheel, I've deleted things that shouldn't be there anymore and just replaced them with suggestions. So that new 60-day period for rental replaced the previous requirement that there be an off-street parking spot for every ADU. That type of requirement isn't allowed by state law anymore. Same sort of thing with K, or I guess it's now J. This one had said there shall be no on-street parking associated with an ADU. That requirement's a little confusing to me. I'm not sure whether it's trying to say that no one is, I assume that if someone is staying in the ADU, they need to be parked on the lot itself and not on the street. I suppose there's really no harm in keeping that kind of restriction if you wanted it. I just took it out, because it seemed to be a bit a bit confusing, and replaced it with something that I think is commonsensical, but either way, that ADUs are subject to the same setback requirements as the principal structure. That's also a requirement in state law. You can't make ADUs subject to greater restrictions on setbacks than the principal structure is. There had also been talk about the covenant that you require now to be recorded in the registry of deeds. I don't necessarily agree that this is problematic legally. I think many municipalities in Maine that I'm aware of have this type of requirement. Obviously, if you're going to do away with the requirement that there be permanent owner occupancy, then recording a covenant in the registry of deeds isn't needed anymore. And so I deleted those in tandem. Again, if you choose to retain those, that's also perfectly fine by me. Those are choices that ultimately you as the town need to make. But in its place, I just added this another standard provision that I've used in other ordinances that clarifies that the ADU still must comply with all shoreline zoning requirements imposed by the town and MDEP. To be clear, going forward, MDEP is of the opinion that in the shoreline zone, an ADU counts as a dwelling unit. And that what that means is that a lot that is going to have a principal home on it and an ADU is going to need to provide double the minimum lot size and double the minimum shore frontage. That type of rule doesn't apply outside of the shoreline zone. So that's a bit of a quirk. I know there's a bill in the legislature that I don't think is going to be successful, but there has been a proposal to eliminate DEP or to override DEP's interpretation there. But as of right now, we're just making clear that shoreline zoning still applies. And then L, again, is another standard provision that we recommend, just that clarifying that you're allowed to have an ADU effectively as of right, but you are also required to provide adequate water and wastewater facilities, and you need to certify that to the code officer before you're getting your building permit and your C of O. So that's one. Two, again, is just a change to your overall definition section. I noticed, and this is just perhaps a quirk that's developed over time, I noticed that you have a definition of ADU in 125.35.1, which is the performance standards section for ADUs. That's okay, but I think it's probably easier to either have your definition in the general definition section or in the performance standards section, but not both. So that's really a housekeeping issue. I've taken out ADU in the definition section because it's already defined adequately in 125.35.1. And then the only other addition is just adding a reference to state law where the definition of tiny home comes from. And I think they've gone out of their way. I can certainly, I can specifically define it if you'd like, as I can basically copy and paste what is in state law as far as what a tiny home is. The reason why I define terms this way, though, and this is looking at the last portion of page 2, is because if state law changed and the definition of what was a legally permissible tiny home changed, having your definition basically run in tandem with state law means you wouldn't have to amend your ordinance in order to account for that change. So this basically says whatever the state says is a tiny home is going to be what we consider a tiny home. And that way it prevents you from getting out of tandem over time. So with this, I mean, I'm happy to discuss anything. You know, most of what is in here, for better or worse, is non-negotiable. But there are some policy choices that I think you can still make. And I think, like we said before, the ADU portion is really, I think, for small towns, the biggest part of compliance with LD 2003 is making sure you're there. I know we still have some work to do on the affordable housing and additional density piece, but I think this is a very good first step, and I'll stop talking and happy to answer your questions and have further discussion.
Any questions, folks?
No, not really question. No, we have decisions to make on how we feel about, owner occupant, regarding owner occupancy and also maximum size of an ADU. I think those are the two big things,
Mhm.
right? For me anyway.
One question that came up was, how do we differentiate a ADU from a house? I mean, it just seems bizarre that we could have this giant ADU with a tiny little primary residence attached to it, if we don't have but I suppose lot coverage would cover that, if we continue with lot coverage.
Well, the current ordinance says 800 square foot. That's,
Right.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that takes care of that.
Yeah,
That's how it would be. You're covered because you've set an 800 square foot minimum or a maximum, excuse me. Even if you didn't, theoretically, by their nature, and your code officer knows this well, I mean, an accessory dwelling, it must be accessory, and the legal, the municipal and zoning lawyer definition of accessory is one that is both incidental and subordinate to the primary. And so this is easier because we can just measure it and determine whether it fits the definition. But even if you didn't have that, these rules would still prevent, you would theoretically be able to designate one as the primary and one as the ADU, but by definition, the ADU needs to be smaller and substantially so.
But could what originally was the primary become the ADU? So the so someone asked to add an ADU.
Someone that owns a house that's 800 square feet or less wants to build a 2,000 square foot house and then swap and make the 800 square foot house the ADU.
So what I'm imagining is somebody wants to, they have a small house on a lot. They now have the resources to build a bigger house and put mom or, a family member in what was originally the primary, the smaller house. So, I'm
The
just
way
trying
it's
to-
drafted, yeah,
a situation that could come up, somebody wanting to put mom in the small house and build a larger house for themselves.
Or a corollary to that, if somebody who has a tiny house as defined in this, and then wants to build an ADU, if you're saying it has to be subordinate to the tiny house, does it have to be under whatever that was, 240 square feet? That was the right number, I don't know.
So, so can the original primary, be swapped and become the ADU,
well, the primary, I mean, by the way it is right now, that primary in order to be an ADU after the fact would have to be 800 or fewer square feet.
Unless
think
we
that's
remove.
That's the practical limitation on that. Without that requirement, I suppose it's possible. But I frankly, I'm not aware of it ever being done. I mean, typically someone would either move to a bigger house or they would expand the existing house or do something like that. But
Yeah.
the way
I
it
might
is
be
right now,
imagining something that would never come up.
exactly. Well, and again, as it's drafted right now, and we're not changing this at all, you have an 800 square foot maximum on ADUs. And so I think that's really your limitation, is that, sure, if someone had an 800 square foot house, they could build a 400 square foot house or bring on a tiny home, and the tiny home could be considered accessory to the 800 square foot principal residence, I suppose. But in terms of switching the designation, I just don't think that's gonna happen.
Is it possible?
Well, again, I mean, the only way you can be permitted as an ADU under this ordinance is if the structure itself is 800 or fewer square feet in floor area. So if someone has a single home on their property right now and say it's 750 square feet, that's too big to be a tiny home, by the way. 750, and they wanted to pull a permit for a 2,000 square foot house, and they could meet, lot coverage, they could meet setbacks, they could do everything like that. Then yeah, I think it's conceivable that the 2,000 square foot house is the primary, and you would change the zoning classification of the existing home to an accessory dwelling unit. If it's under 800 square feet, then yeah, I think that's conceivable. I just don't think it's likely.
What is the maximum square footage for a tiny home?
I believe it's 425, but let me just pull up, let me pull up the definition.
It says 400 square feet under MRS Title 29A.
400 square feet.
Yeah, 400.
I have one question. If we retain this language, the owner is required to occupy either the primary residence or the ADU as his primary legal residence. Does that mean that no seasonal resident could build an ADU?
Go ahead.
More or less, yeah. Well, yes. They could build an ADU, but then they would have to sell their property and inhabit the ADU seasonally while the new owner of the principal residence lived in it year round. But yes, I mean, by permanent, we're talking about somebody who establishes their domicile here. I suppose they could be here, 8 months out of the year and not 12, but yeah, the point of that type of restriction again is to prevent a situation where someone builds an ADU and then sells effectively, to a seasonal resident, a 2-unit property. It's to encourage year-round residency. But like I said, that type of requirement, it's frequently seen, but it's not required.
Yeah, but I mean, so primary resident, legal resident, I mean, that person doesn't have to be here all 12 months. They just need
No.
to be vote here,
That's where they vote.
Right, so they can still be snowbirds.
6
That's what
months.
you just said.
Yeah, 6 months and a day, I would think.
Right.
Yeah.
And, we should consider what we as a town desire. Do we want everyone to be able to build an ADU or not? And I don't have a firm opinion about that, but it's what we should be considering.
Yeah. We're stuck on that. I know I am.
Now, one question we came up that you had brought up before, and I don't know if I have the correct wording, but you had said that our ordinance does not indicate what the minimum area is required for a dwelling unit. I mean, it says through going back and forth, it's 1.5 acres, but it doesn't cite it specifically that a dwelling unit must be on 1.5 acres.
It says lot size, it doesn't say per dwelling unit.
Right.
Right.
Right, and again, this is a policy choice. This is not this is not something you necessarily need to fix, but let's take a scenario where someone has a 1.5 acre lot. You have a minimum lot size in order for it to be a legal lot of 1.5 acres, but I believe you're correct that you do not have, it is not specific that it is 1.5 acres required per dwelling unit. And I think that needs to be explicit if that's how you're going to be interpreting that. So under LD 2003, with raw land and even with an existing dwelling built on there, in some areas of town, and we talked about what these are your growth areas or areas with public water and sewer. There are situations where you may need to be required to allow a second principal dwelling, not an ADU, a full house, to be built on that lot. Now, the natural protection against that, and I only say protection because most of the time when I'm talking to smaller towns, this is a concern to them. The natural protection that you typically have in this situation is something in your ordinance that says, sure, it's 1.5 acres per dwelling, it's 1.5 acres for legal lot, but it's also 1.5 acres per dwelling unit, or it's 1.5 acres for the first and then 1 acre for the second, or something like that. And so that means that theoretically, you could not build 2 principal units on a 1.5 acre lot. You would either need 3 acres in my example, or perhaps 2.5, or what have you. You don't have that in your ordinance right now, and so I'm just flagging it as something to consider, that the argument could be made. It remains to be seen whether someone would ever decide that that's something they wanted to do. But the argument could be made that LD 2003 requires you to issue permits, assuming that they meet setbacks and they meet lot coverage, which again could be another natural restriction on this type of thing, is that it would probably be pretty hard to meet your lot coverage requirement if you're putting 2 principal dwellings on the same 1.5 acre lot or something like that. So that's something to flag. I'm not saying you need to fix it, but I just don't want that to come as a surprise.
I think we should fix it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it needs to be fixed, yeah.
So we would just cite that the minimum area for a dwelling unit is 1.5 acres, with the exception of ADUs and in the town centers where we have smaller lot sizes. I think they may even say that.
Unless you want to allow a duplex or something on 1.5 acres.
Yeah, we should clear up that language because that's the way we've always interpreted it.
Yeah, and I think, I can't find it now, but I think it might say that in the DRO.
Yeah, there has
That-
something,
Yeah, it's per dwelling unit.
yeah.
It does. Well, you have net residential density in the DRO. And that's the concept that I'm effectively getting at. And again, this, in almost all circumstances, and certainly up until now, would only come up in the situation of a subdivision, right? So a developer has a large piece of land and they're looking to figure out how many dwelling units they can fit onto this big piece of raw land. The difference now is that these wouldn't necessarily come to you as a subdivision. And it's not necessarily going to be raw land either. It could be somebody who chooses to put or thinks it's possible to put an additional single family home on their existing lot that already has one. So I don't think that existing language covers you in that situation.
All right. My head's spinning just the thought of it, but okay.
Well, it seems that if you just make the language clear that it's 1.5 acre per dwelling unit outside of town centers,
Yeah,
that's a 1 sentence correction.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, yep.
And I think, I think that goes into 125-33, frankly. It's, minimum lot size in all districts. And you can just say, with the exception of the town centers district, each lot must contain at least 1.5 acres per residential dwelling unit. But that can be part of another set of amendments. I'm happy to put that language together too and just add it to what we have right now. That shouldn't be too difficult.
Thank you.
yeah,
Good.
Okay.
yeah, and I think basically it's catching all the other places where it might be mentioned, where it should be clarified.
it does make it a little bit nice and complicated when you have a DRO and a land use ordinance, but that's just my own commentary.
Oh,
That's not common to have that.
Well, they're built into one, so you don't have to, but a lot of towns do have a zoning or land use ordinance and then a site plan review ordinance or something like that. So no, it's not all that uncommon. But yeah, I'll do a general scan of both of those ordinances to see what sort of tweaks we need to make on that point.
Mhm. Okay.
And I think, you know, the one piece that we still need, for what it's worth, I don't know if you're privy to this information either, but I know, I think there are folks in a lot of other small towns that are meeting with the state and talking about these issues, and it seems to be a general consensus that the legislature likely is not going to give any towns a get out of jail free card or even a delay in the implementation of this law. But it also sounds as if on July 1, probably about 10% of the municipalities in Maine are going to be in compliance. So there's strength in numbers. I'm not saying we drag our feet, but I'm saying that you are not going to be alone in not having everything perfectly done in the next month. The state is not planning on coming with an enforcement squad or anything like that. Yeah, exactly. You know, the one challenge is going to be, and we can deal with this on a case-by-case basis. It's going to be the possibility that someone shows up at the code office and asks for a building permit for something they think is allowed by LD 2003, and we're going to have to look closely at that to make sure what's what. Until you get the ordinances amended, because it is true that on July 1, if LD 2003 is in conflict with your ordinances, the state law trumps. So we just need to be careful of that. But you know, I think we're making good progress, and I don't have much concern that we won't get there shortly.
so, we were kind of thinking for the regular dwelling density part, we're not gonna have to do a whole lot.
Correct. Well, I mean, a large part of it you may be dealing with by clarifying again that the minimum lot size is per dwelling unit, because that would cut off any possibility that someone, I mean, I don't know the grand scale of lot sizes in Islesboro, but it seems to me likely that you probably have a lot of lots that are somewhere between 1.5 and 3 acres, right? Or are we dealing with a lot of larger plots, maybe?
Larger too, yeah.
Well, I mean, the larger lots, I mean, conceivably could be subdivided. And that's something you already allow for and something you'd expect. I think most people are most concerned about the effect of, you know, 1.5 acre lot of raw land and trying to plop down four houses on it.
Yeah.
We'd clarify that that's not possible, but also keep in mind that even if we didn't make any changes, that sort of thing is only allowable in your town center.
And so actually, I think that's the one place where we do need to add some language. So, for dwelling unit, in the dwelling unit allowance section, up to 4 units in a growth area, I think we do probably have to add some language for that in town centers.
Well, and I think that was one of the outstanding things that we were going to do. You were going to do some research on since last time, was really identifying. I know there was sort of a lack of overlap perhaps between what you identify as your growth areas in your comp plan, as opposed to what you consider to be the town centers district, which I think is probably what was tried to accomplish all of that.
Yeah. We're I think planning to, you know, when we present all this to the town at the same time, we'll probably ask to make some changes, you know, at the same time, so it can be voted on at the same time.
So as of right now, you're essentially considering your town centers district to be the growth area, right?
Maybe Tom could speak to that.
Yeah.
'Cause he,
Well, that was certainly the intention, following from the comprehensive plan. outlined, that that would be our growth area, so that's, though we never overtly said growth area, I don't think in the town center's amendments, that's certainly what they are intended to be. And as you were implying, we would like to just tweak the border of that town center, the post office district. But other than that, well, including that, we would like to have those coincide completely. The growth area would be the town center's area.
Okay. So I think we can, that's helpful because that's an existing zoning district, and so it's easy to find on a map. You know, and ease of implementation is the big goal here also, is we want someone to know when they buy a piece of property, or if they own property right now, sort of what they're allowed to do. And so the town centers district would be the area where but still, well, I guess this is the outstanding question. You are not required, so we've talked about 1.5 acres per dwelling unit. But are you thinking that that applies townwide, or does that, or is it just 1.5 acre minimum lot size to be a legal lot in the town centers district, and the rest of it is fair game?
No, it's 1.5 acres island wide, except for the town centers.
Right.
So what, just so I'm clear, so 1.5 acres per dwelling unit, island wide, except town centers.
Correct.
Okay. We can do that. Are there areas, I'm not sure if we specifically asked this, but are there areas outside of the town center that have both public water and public sewer?
Not water.
Okay,
Well,
well, that's
sewer.
easy enough then.
Sewer.
Not sewer or water, outside the town center.
Oh,
Well,
no.
you need to have-
outside
you
the
need to have
town
both.
centers? No, neither. Yeah.
Okay. So what we'll just do is, I think that really does cover it all then. If we've established that your growth area is the town centers district, and we've established that we're gonna clarify that it's 1.5 acres per dwelling unit, but not in the town centers, then I'll add some additional language somewhere that references to the key provisions of LD 2003 that makes clear to somebody that if they're in the town centers district, that they are permitted to develop their land consistent with what state law now allows. And there's ways of doing that to make it pretty user friendly, but okay, that's easy enough. Okay. That's really all you need to obviously do a little bit more thinking about, between now and the time that this goes to the planning board, about what you want to recommend in terms of owner occupancy for ADUs. And in the next week or so, I can get you a draft of proposed changes to accomplish these two things we've discussed today. And I can get that to Carrie. And then, I'm happy to have another session like this, quick session on Zoom, or, you can communicate your questions through Carrie to me and we can get them answered. But I think, barring some big change, I think that should do it.
Yeah, and if you could just keep in mind, the whole thing about adding additional dwelling units, but I believe we're gonna require the 1.5 acres throughout the town, so it should be pretty straightforward. Maybe we don't even have to modify it according to, the section within the rules.
Well, again, I'm hearing from some, I just want to be clear on this point. Do you want that 1.5 acres per dwelling unit to apply in the town centers?
No,
No.
not in town centers. It's
Okay, because when I hear, okay, so when, maybe this is just local, when you say town-wide or island-wide, does that term typically exclude the town center?
Well, yes, now.
Okay, all right. I'm getting it. Thank you for your patience.
Now, don't we have to do something about the affordable housing density section?
You
That was the
do.
question- That was the question I was gonna ask. We also want to look at it, changing the boundary of one of the town centers to include the area that Rick is talking about for affordable housing, and also to address the fact that the boundary was based on wrong information about setbacks.
Yeah, so for the town center map for Dark Harbor, my thought was to have the border run, along property lines instead of,
Shoreline zone.
along the shoreline zone, line. Because I mean, it is, running through, some properties, so,
The only reason I could think that you wouldn't want to do that if the town center's line, respecting shoreline protection area, ran through a lot. If the lot were big enough, you could still subdivide it and have one piece that was entirely within the town center.
we're not talking about subdividing a lot, we're talking about having a lot. And that's another question, so having a lot be treated as though, entire lot, as though it's being treated as though it's within the town center. So that lot can take advantage of, the, density bonus. Now, that piece of a lot that was in shoreline zone, that piece is always gonna have, that trumps everything in shoreline zoning. But that doesn't mean that the lot can't be treated as though it's within town center.
Or some portion of it could be if it were subdivided.
Yeah. If it were subdivided, yeah.
So if you do it, if you draw the line now along existing property lines, you're not allowing that possibility. And I don't even know if any lot's big enough to do that.
Yeah, we're talking about subdividing.
Ben,
we're
do
talking
you
about
have a
affordable
copy of
housing.
our,
For
the
instance, this
town
one.
center maps? I
This
meant
one
to
goes
send it
across
to you,
here.
and I
If you
forgot.
were to exclude this entire lot
No,
and have the town center do here,
I'll
then
get it,
this
I'll send it to
landowner
you.
could never subdivide and have some piece still under the shoreline protection district and some piece, another separate lot now, be in the town center.
and I guess that's the other thing is, Ben, you guys talk, but I was just gonna say, I guess the affordable housing can only go in the town center areas. So if you can review that ordinance relative to affordable housing,
Here, the way it
if
is.
there's anything.
So-
this-
So this is
this
the thing with affordable housing.
Um,
You can put affordable housing wherever you'd like. You can allow it
the whole thing can't be.
island wide if you'd like.
The town
Right.
center.
But what's required by the statute is that in your growth areas, which is the town center, you're required to provide a density bonus of 2.5 times.
Yes, it is.
So
right? So this piece
what that-
is be in shoreline.
what that practically means right now, and
Developed 20%.
the problem is that you already have a very low,
All of this.
minimum lot size per dwelling unit in the town centers right now at 20,000 square feet. So
Can't be considered. in the
20,000,
They can be both.
we're looking at 8,000 square foot minimum per dwelling unit
Lots here are
in the town
not.
centers district. So
And in the shoreline zone,
I'm not-
both.
I need a clarification here because that's not what I heard from the DECD people, about affordable
But
housing.
for Rick's
They said to me that it had to be 1 in a growth area, it had to be 2 on public water and sewer. Is that not the case?
for the density.
let me pull up the statute again. That's not my understanding, but
No, not the entire lot.
It has to have the soil to support whatever.
Right.
No, trust me, I was on them about this and that's what they told me. They said that a couple of times to me.
So for Rick's,
They said, I can show you the email response to that question.
the
you have the
whole
statute
lot
in front of you, Rick?
I had the 2003 in front of me.
Yeah,
They have to take advantage
yeah.
of that.
It's
So-
basically-
I'm sorry.
So-
I read this to the DECD people, what's his name, Hillary
Yeah.
Yep.
Ben. And I said, this is what it says, but they told me, and I wish I had my computer, I'd show you the email they sent back. Cause I asked them in the Zoom meeting,
Well,
and they said it had to be a town center, had to have public sewer and water. And then I actually, I went back and read it again, and it does not say that in LD 2003, but they're saying that that's the case.
Right, if you look at, section 2 in the.
Yeah, it says or.
Yeah, it's,
well,
Yeah,
then I think as you said, the, density requirement of only applies
this
applies
piece
in the
right
town
here.
center.
We're 20,000 square feet.
They don't exclude.
That part is clear, but it does say the development must be in a designated growth area, or the development must be served by a public special district or other centrally managed water system and a public special district or other comparable sewer system.
Yeah, now that's what DECD said, so
The density bonus.
it's an or, but the only place that we have public sewer is in Dark Harbor, and there is no public water anywhere that I'm aware of on the island. So that or get excluded because you can't have either one of those.
Well, but I read that to mean that it's either in a growth area or it's in a non-growth area that has public water and sewer.
Along the property lines.
I guess I'm gonna have to have a
Well,
third
yeah,
conversation with the DECD people, because I'm telling you, that's not what they told me twice. Okay.
Fair
And
enough.
I'm actually agreeing with you, because the law doesn't say that, but the DECD people do say that.
That's interesting. Huh.
No, sure. I think Shoreline has a.
Well, so setting that
Like the town center.
setting that aside, the practical, assuming I'm right.
So if we drew this line here.
Based on my reading, you would have an 8,000 square foot minimum lot size per dwelling unit in the town center district for affordable housing.
Well, these will.
Because you have 20,000 right now, and you're required to allow 2.5 times density bonus.
District. Would you tell me, because I'm not that clear,
Well-
the additional.
I can see that I'm gonna be sending Ben and Hillary another email tomorrow morning,
Maybe Ben could contact them
What
with that
else?
clarification.
Well, interestingly enough, Rick, we've got a briefing with them next week, and so if you want to hold off, I'm happy to ask that question. So
yeah,
at least,
cause I was pressing them on that, because I'm the affordable housing guy on Islesboro, and I'm trying to look
I
for
know.
places to build houses. And they shot me down there, and they shot me down twice on that thing. So I would love to know, because I agree with you, that's not what this law says,
Yeah.
but that's what they're saying.
So. And, and these.
Well, Ben, ask the question for us.
I will.
Yeah, that would be great.
I'm pulling up the regulations right now, because I'm curious whether I mean, the regulations have to be consistent with the statute, so I don't expect that there's any discrepancy there, but that's curious to me, because I think the assumption, Rick, is that in a growth area, the reason why a municipality would designate something as a growth area is because it's already serviced by the type of utilities that you would need for growth. And so by virtue of being a growth area, you're assuming that you have that capacity. That's possible, though, that there are areas outside of a growth area that also have water and sewer, which is why the legislature wanted to let it. But we can, yeah.
Okay,
I'll-
I may have misspoken, and I wanna correct myself before you go jump on the DECD people.
You still.
Because this was in conjunction with the properties that Islesboro Affordable Property already owns,
It was shown.
currently,
in the-
none of which are in the town center development growth area. So that was
Okay.
probably the reason why they kicked me out, okay? If we were to include those properties we've talked about here at the planning board workshop, then if I have properties that are within the designated growth area,
75% of your lot or something.
Yeah,
and
And.
it goes to, you're saying it goes down to 8,000 square feet?
as it currently reads,
And
the way that the state law says is that you're required to allow a 2.5 time density bonus.
this,
Yes,
that this line.
Which means that you take whatever, and right now it's a 20,000 square foot. Minimum lot size in, where is it?
I think
I'm
these are,
Yeah, in this town center.
I don't know
Yep.
how interested these folks would be.
Oh, it's
in being in the
125
town center.
29.1.
Town centers district, minimum lot size, residential lots,
Those two.
minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet, multiple multifamily dwellings on public. Well, so here's the one caveat, of course, is that 125.29.1 requires public sewer to get the benefit of these reduced minimum
that-
lots.
That's because it's taking advantage.
okay,
of
now I
the
spoke to
density
them
bonus.
about that as well, because the only place we have, you know, there seemed to be a number that they put on, like 2,000 gallons per day would qualify as a
Is that the lot?
public
Is it the-
sewer for affordable housing
I don't think.
density requirements. Does anybody have any knowledge of that? Because that seems to be a number that I've been hearing about.
Yeah, it's the definition of comparable
Here.
Comparable sewer or whatever.
Oh,
Comparable sewer system discharges over 2,000 gallons of wastewater.
Okay, so if it were in, if we were able to move some of these properties into town centers, and I was able to find septics of 2,000 gallons a day, how do I get around the
so.
public water? Because there's no place on the island that has a water facility.
This lot could connect to the town sewer.
I think the limitation you're gonna find is
Would
that
they have all of
what
that? I mean, it would be expensive
is-
to run the line, but, you know.
I think
The-
that's.
and they-
what the town centers district says right now is that in order to have the 20,000, which could be reduced, it still needs to be on public sewer in order for
It is, because you can.
that
see it.
20,000 to be your baseline.
Consistent distance.
Okay, there
from
is
the
no
sewer.
way
Yeah,
I think that's.
that I'm aware of that you're gonna be able
I
to.
think that's what.
If you just put the properties in the town center, then you can go to the 20,000 per unit, right?
could be buildable.
If you're on public sewer, because that's what your existing code says.
Here,
Yeah, yeah.
if Myra gave it.
On public sewer.
yeah. You could have.
Where
you
in
know,
the town
apartments.
centers.
Does it say that for town center?
Yeah, 125.29.1 B1A. Residential lots, I know, residential lots other than multifamily dwelling lots on public sewer shall have a minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet.
Because this was,
Oh,
This is
no,
the dog.
oh, so it has to be in public
and
sewer, so that's the
it's not
problem.
under the same, you know, shoreline.
Well, we have all these amendments to make properties affordable, none of
Your-
which
your
apply
question about moving that
to
is good.
affordable housing on Islesboro, which just
It is
irritates the
about
bejeebers
Whether
out of me.
those two definitions would clash about being in the town center.
All I
and-
would say, Rick, and this is, what I would say is that that's a point to lobby.
Wait.
So for this.
Here I am. I'm
I know. And that is where I get to gracefully step away because that is not my mandate.
I agree entirely.
But there must be other communities, like Islesboro that do not have,
And I. and I
public
don't think you can
sewer and
have it
water
if it's
and
infrastructure.
do have affordable housing and want to be able to expand it. I would think that there's more than just
That's a good question.
Islesboro who want to do something about that.
Or- Yeah, Dave or.
Certainly. The thing to keep in mind with LD 2003 again is this is a baseline. It does not set the ceiling. Meaning that Islesboro is free to do whatever well, that's not completely true. It's free to do much more than LD 2003 requires in terms of facilitating affordable housing and the like. But all I'm focusing on right now is making sure that we're getting your ordinances up to that baseline in certain areas such that you're in compliance come July 1 or shortly thereafter. But you're right. I mean, there's nothing that prevents the planning board and town meeting eventually from making it much easier with counsel from people who are in the business of doing this, like Rick, to make it easier to build affordable housing on Islesboro. But what the law says is that you're only required to allow these density bonuses in growth areas, or if you're allowed, or if you have public water and sewer available.
Okay, it's an or.
Yes,
So if it's on
So if
public,
it's on, if it's.
on town center,
If it's in, if we were to move some of these properties I'm talking about into town centers, I get the density bonus of 2.5, because that's not what I heard 5 minutes
No,
ago.
it's just the public sewer business.
Is
So-
there
It's or.
is
So
there a public sewer requirement in a town center to get 2.5 times the density?
Where is the or?
what it currently says, Rick, is that in the town center,
I got it.
the minimum lot size is reduced to 20,000 square feet
Right.
when the building is on public sewer. It's silent as to what happens for a project that is not on public sewer.
Okay,
But that's-
give me the reference that you're using, because I'm gonna look that up, because I don't really have that. What was that reference again?
Sure, so this is your town code, it's section 125 -29.1. Subsection B 1A.
Okay, 125.29.1 B1A.
Yeah.
Does anybody get a copy of that? Okay.
We have one, similar question. Is it possible for the town centers, our designated growth area, to
Be in the growth.
overlap
area under
a
section-
shoreline protection district?
Subsection 1, the paragraph A or B.
Yes.
or The water is.
Yes. it
But
is here.
Keep in mind, shoreline zoning is much more restrictive than regular zoning, and so just by virtue of being in the town center doesn't necessarily mean that more development is available.
So for instance, specifically, if we have a lot that is partially in our present town center and partially in the shoreline protection district, if we were to redraw the town center boundary to include that entire lot, could it obtain the
The density bonus.
the density bonus?
I suppose it could, but keep in mind that all of this remains subject to shoreline zoning. So even if there was a density bonus, you're still gonna be subject to much more restrictive shoreline zoning rules. So as a
So I'm sorry. go ahead.
conceptually, it's possible, but I don't know if that really means that, you know, on a practical level, you're gonna be able to build more housing there than you would otherwise.
So correct me if I'm wrong, are you saying that a lot could live both in a town center growth area and in shoreland zone?
I would have to look at specifically how your ordinance is worded, but in most cases that I'm aware of, a shoreline zone is considered to be what we call an overlay. Which means that it could have base zoning, which has nothing to do necessarily with whether it's close to water or the like. But the portions of that lot that are 275 feet away from the normal high water line of the resource would still be subject to shoreline zoning. So theoretically, you could have the whole lot in town centers, but a large portion of that could still be in shoreline zoning, which practically speaking means it's much more restricted as to development than would be otherwise. Does that make sense?
So, yes, and so for instance, there is a lot with a vacant building in it here. And the lot is partially in, right, the way the border is drawn right now, the lot is partially within the town center. But it's a vacant building that could easily be, 3 apartments. And so we were trying to think of ways to make that, and it is on town sewer, so at least, that lot wouldn't have to worry about, any septic, issues as far as, shoreline zoning goes. So, we have an actual example that we're trying to make work, I guess. This is not just some hypothetical thing
Yeah.
in the air.
I mean, one thing to keep in mind, I'm just reading 125-27, designates your shoreline protection district of those areas of the protection sectors which are not in another district. I think that only that is specific to RP and maritime. Okay, yeah. I mean, it's quite possible that you could redevelop that parcel. I think what you're going to need to be concerned about most is sort of finding out where that 275-foot line is.
Yes, but even if that shoreline protection district takes out a small corner of the lot, the rest of the lot could be developed as we're speaking of.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay, that's news to me. Good.
You have to keep in mind, though, I mean, the one caveat to this is that, you need to be very careful in looking at Article 3 of your ordinance, which is, talks about the districts and making sure that it's not in shoreland, it's not in maritime protections, it's not in resource protection, all of those could still apply, but if
You mean the
most of
building
that,
itself?
I mean, if most of that lot is far enough away from the water, then it should fall outside of the definition of those, and it could be developable, yeah.
All right, one last question. To make that happen on that lot that is right now bisected by the Shoreland Protection District, do we need to change the town center line to include the entire lot?
Well, it depends on which area of the lot you want to develop. I'd have to look. There are typically the same manner. I'm just trying to see, sometimes your ordinances have provisions that talk about, which, I'll leave it like this, so as not to give you bad information off the cuff. It's something that your code officer should look at a little bit more closely, and I'm happy to talk with him about the provisions of what would apply and what wouldn't. I think it may be necessary that you would have to move the boundary, but again, I'll put it this way. Town center's district is determined based on what your map says. Because you don't have a written description, I don't believe. No, you don't. Of exactly what areas are. The flip side of that is your resource protection district, your shoreline district, they're all defined areas. They're meant to be measured from a water body out. So you'd want to check to see exactly where that line is. That may give you some clarification, but the way I would interpret it is that if the town center's district is right next door and only a small portion of the lot is actually subject to shoreline zoning because of its proximity to the water, then the rest of it needs to have a zone. And if it's not the town center's district, I don't know what it would be. How's that for an answer?
boy.
Unless you had a different zoning district that for some reason it would fall into.
Whatever it was before, prior. Yeah, that's a good point, because we discovered up here, at the town office, we were planning to develop and put in a new building. And, the town center's line was drawn following the resource protection line.
Yep.
And rather than the property line, well, we then went out to the site where the proposed building was being considered. And it didn't meet the resource protection requirements.
Yep.
So if actually that portion of the parcel could receive different interpretations in terms of planning board, review, if it was in the town centers. So.
RP is difficult because it's all based on, things that are scientifically provable, but aren't, like, I don't understand them either. You need, things like high and moderate value deer wintering areas, right? And wading bird habitats, and all of that are delineated and mapped by experts, to give you a good idea of where that is. But a lot of times there can be debates and disputes about where that line is, because that does make a big difference about what you can do.
And I think it's that we do have a statement somewhere in here that I discovered that says that you have to go out and verify the line.
Yes.
These
Yep,
are all
that-
approximations.
Exactly, and that's the difference between, a zoning map for traditional zoning and for shoreline zoning, is because the general rule of thumb is that your ordinance controls. And so if your ordinance says it needs to be measured from this spot to this spot, and your map is inaccurate,
Yeah,
it's gonna be the definition and the actual on the ground measurement that controls.
right.
Okay,
That's a
so I
good,
think you're right. I think you need to make all those town central boundaries run along.
yeah.
Ben, I just sent you some
Okay.
photos of our town centers.
Yeah,
now.
thank you, Carrie, I appreciate that.
I have one more question on the town centers. Our ordinance says that, a lot can't, be covered more than 70% with buildings. Would that still hold true?
Yes. Yep.
All right, you're gonna have to,
Is that a problem?
what could be,
You
on the side of the buildings.
Yeah.
In town.
You're gonna have to educate me again, because I thought I knew what I knew when I came in there, and then you changed my mind, and now I'm reading 125-29-1B-1A.
Yep.
It says, and I quote, residential lots other than multiple family dwelling lots on public sewer, there probably should be some commas in here, but shall have a minimum lot size of 20,000 feet. So if IAP property is within the town center's district and it's not a multifamily dwelling, doesn't that mean that the minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not what I heard 15 minutes ago.
I mean, did you understand that? Yeah.
We should make a copy of this.
Well, I missed the public sewer, that it was an or in between, or on, no, other than, I missed the other than in that first,
Other than
1A.
multi-families.
yes.
So
That's,
if it-
Rick, I will say that's a fair reading. I am inserting commas in my head where I think they should be. But I agree with you that, it's obvious, there are no commas in that statement, so my reading of it.
I mean, if you read the 1B, the one right below it, it talks about multifamily development, so it makes sense that 1A is talking about things not being multifamily dwellings, being 20,000 square feet, because 1B talks about multifamily dwellings.
Oh, I'm with you there. It's really just the question of where this public sewer issue comes in. I know. This is what I do for a living, unfortunately.
So I guess the question is, should we be adding commas to that first?
Oh, absolutely, but by the same token, you can make the argument that you know, if you look at 1B, it starts off by saying multifamily dwelling units on public sewer, as if that is the type of housing you're talking about. And by that virtue, you could look at 1A and just say
It's
that
excluded.
residential lots, comma, other than multifamily dwelling lots on public sewer, comma, shall have a, as opposed to residential lots, comma, other than multifamily dwelling lots, comma, on public sewer, comma, shall have see, this is what, right,
Commas are very important.
they are very important there. I mean, the
We want
Rick,
commas.
all I'm saying, Rick, is that what I'm not sure of in 1A is whether to get 20,000 square feet, you need to be on public sewer or not.
Well, if you're asking me for the reading,
Oh, I know, yeah.
Oh, I see. So I don't know what, yeah, I don't know what the situation is in that, particularly Dark Harbor.
I don't think it's clear. Let's just put it that way.
They're on public.
All-
sewer.
well, it just seems to me that you wouldn't have a B, the comments in B, if you meant to have it seems like you're excluding lots not you're excluding non-multifamily dwelling lots in A, and you're including it in B. And so if you read it the way I would like it to be read, anything other than a multifamily dwelling on public sewer can have 20,000 square foot lot.
But the town could make it
But
the way Rick would like it. If we choose to, right, Ben?
Sure.
Well, you can interpret that sentence one of two ways. The question is. which
Or you
way
could
do
interpret it the way that Rick is interpreting it, and you don't have to amend anything,
Yes,
That's-
there we go.
but that requires Rick to submit a building permit application or a subdivision application to the code enforcement officer before he's gonna get an answer.
I've already talked to him. I already got the subdivision application. I just wanna make sure that, you know, that we're talking apples and apples here. I mean, if you put a couple of commas in the right place there and then move that property into the town centers, you solve all my problems.
Yeah, but we're not just public sewer here. We need to make it a comparable public sewer.
Well,
Are we talking about Dark Harbor right now?
Yeah, well, the town centers. It's,
where's
it's
the
called
water?
the public
You need
sewer.
your own of those.
I'm gonna have to get a copy of that.
So we're
Copy
not.
machine.
But I,
not
isn't there somewhere,
gonna-
there's somewhere else that says that
Where's
the
the first part?
the-
I saw this.
new construction in town centers that have sewer must connect.
Oh.
Shall be connected to a public sewer and water system if available at the time of construction.
I'm gonna beat this rap yet.
Interesting. Well, Ben, this is certainly confusing. I guess you could look at these things and see if you can, it does look like in below the set. Under item C1, it says all new construction will tie into a public sewer if available. So down in the Dark Harbor area, they want everybody to be on public sewer.
Yep.
Yeah. Ah, God, help us all. All right. So.
Rick, for what it's worth, I've opened up the administrative regulations that go hand in hand with LD 2003. And it still says that in order to be eligible for the density bonus, you need to be in a growth area or served by public water and sewer. So,
Put a couple of commas in there, put me in the growth area, and I'm good to go as far as I'm concerned.
yeah. So folks, I sort of see my marching orders as getting into proposing an additional amendment to deal with the minimum lot size per dwelling unit outside of the town centers issue. And I'm gonna scan both your development review and your land use ordinance for that issue. And I'm also gonna propose some language for density bonuses for affordable housing in the town centers district also.
Excellent.
And I'll send that along in the next week or two. And I'm happy to join for another meeting, but also happy to just field your questions by email, whatever's easier for you.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
thank
You're very welcome. Hope you all have a great Memorial Day weekend.
you.
Yeah,
You too.
you too. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. Have a good evening.
You
Yep.
too, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.